Most lamps have one job, to light the room, but that's not exactly thrilling. So naturally, I dialed it way up and made an insane 6-foot sculptural lamp with otherworldly details designed to transform the atmosphere of the space. I mean, it may not solve a problem or even be that practical, and yet it might be the kind of thing we need more of. So instead of explaining it, I'll let you experience it for yourself.
Oh, like that? This is the leftover rustic walnut from last video, and in that project we used a lot of the clear boards to make a geometric pattern. But this time I want to utilize the rustic aspect and make it more organic.
And organic is going to have a lot of different meanings in this project. I don't know whether to call it a sculptural lamp or the craziest thing I've ever built. Let's go with the second one, the craziest thing I've ever built. And I don't mean that in a YouTube-y way where I'm just trying to get views out of it. I more or less mean it in a way where it's going to incorporate so many different variables that I've never tried to incorporate before. So as we start the base of this sculpture, things will only get harder from here. For this base, I need a really thick slab of walnut, something that's really heavy and that will be able to take the weight of everything that's placed on top. So to get that 4.5 inches thick that I'm going for, I'm cutting a bunch of boards to that width and then I'm going to glue them all together. And that by itself is a pretty easy process. The thing that makes it more challenging is I'm going to have channels cut into it. These channels both have an important purpose, but they also need to be placed in a very precise spot. If they're placed even 1 inch away from where they're supposed to be, then it can throw off the entire design moving forward.
All right, so that definitely wasn't ideal, but it got the job done. I'm gonna see if I can cut at least most of these on the small bandsaw though, because that'll make my life a lot easier.
To help you understand what I'm doing, first you need to understand that in woodworking, after you glue boards together, it can be much more time consuming to cut sections out of them. So I'm actually pre-cutting sections out of each board, that way it gets rid of most of the waste right away incredibly fast.
One thing Bridget did help me realize is that I was losing my lines of my triangle when I cut these out. So she was like, you should probably number them. She's smarter than I am.
So how did this abstract idea come to be? Well, a little while ago, Toby actually chewed through the wires of both of our standing lamps. The lucky side of this is that the wall switch was turned off. The downside is we were worried he didn't learn his lesson. But fast forward another year, and he is now a very good boy, which recently opened up the possibility of designing something new, something awesome.
I think the best way is probably going to be dragging it this way. Holy mother of God! Oh, what was that? Probably one of the clamps. See, easy peasy. That is a lot of clamps. All right, so after this crazy glue up, I made myself lunch and generously gave myself food poisoning. So let's just say it's been a couple days. And in case you're wondering, it's 171 pounds or 77 kilos with all these clamps on it.
And this thing won't fit over my joiner or through my planer right now, so I might as well hand flatten it.
I already clogged it, so I'm gonna use a different hand plane.
Each one of my hand planes is set up for a different style or depth of cut, so using the right hand plane for flattening versus finishing is actually really important. And now as I'm cutting a little bit of width off of this so that I can fit it through my planer, which is 25 inches wide, I realized I probably could have just made a sled and flattened it in the planer. But there was a time not too far in the past where I had to flatten everything by hand. I didn't have a jointer. My planer, even with fresh knives, sounded like it was going to just destroy the entire planet. So I've just learned to work with what I have when I have it. Right now, the tool that's changing things for me the most is the 3D printer of all things.
That's why I gotta go soft. Very, very softly.
Since we rough cut these sections out before the boards were even glued together, I can just use a 3D printed template to finalize things with a router. But even with most of the material being gone, it's still a lot of work.
So I've kind of reached the limits of this bit because at that full depth, I was starting to run into the collet. So I need to switch to a much bigger bit.
If you're not acquainted with woodworking, you probably don't know that large bits like this are messy and a bit scary to use. But I'm about to add something to the process that makes it a bit more dangerous.
I'm still not at full depth, so now I need to add this extension. So I just realized that the bearing on this bit is slightly smaller than the collet. So this is actually going to be rubbing against the inside. So I'm going to have to take it nice and slow. I'm locking this one down really tight. Sketchy. Well, it worked, but I do not recommend doing that. Let's see if this test print fits. And she fits perfectly. Things will start to make sense as we progress.
So you saw it, there's no denying it, that was a pot that went in that hole. Granted, it was a yellow prototype pot, and I definitely would never use yellow in the final product, but since we can move forward, this next cutout section is going to be quite a bit different. So I'm using the carving equipment that Arbortech sent me to hollow out and clean up this pond section. So yes, there's going to be water in this sculpture, and it's not going to be just a simple pond. This thing will be an entire ecosystem.
So now there's enough space to fit a few components that will be important in this process. And now I'm just spending time sanding everything to get it smoothed out just a little bit before we go to the next steps.
These will pretty much be the only straight cuts that I make for the entirety of this video, except for maybe a few fill pieces later on. And this part of the design more or less came from my roots, which will be an ironic statement further in the video. And right now my roots seem to be diamonds. In a lot of my recent videos, I've used diamonds whether I intended to or not, they've just been incorporated. For instance, in the diamond table video, everything was clearly built around diamonds. It was the entire concept. But in my mallet video, the textured ebony plates that I placed on the sides, those also happened to be diamonds. But that, on the other hand, was a complete accident. I didn't intend to have those shapes, they just showed up. And what about this, the spirograph table that I did? All I did was cut circles the entire time, but it still made diamonds. So I mean, seriously, do I take that as a sign, or is it just a coincidence?
So one thing that I didn't account for is after I cut the angle on this side, I have to flip it around and then register that side against the fence, which is not going to work very well because it's not a perfectly straight cut. I think it's better to just rough cut this on the bandsaw and then clean it up on the joiner.
So a year after Toby chewed those wires, we still didn't have working standing lamps in the front room. So Bridget asked, do you think a lamp video would be good because we really need a new lamp? And she wasn't wrong, but I had different plans, so I dismissed the idea. 1 month later though, she brings it up again, and this entire idea came to my brain all at once.
What I like about this is that the taper gets wider closer to the bottom because this angle is sharper than this angle. I thought that was a nice touch.
With that hefty base ready to be added onto, we're going to start cutting a lot of blocks. And you don't actually need to see the cutting of each block, but just know that each one of these is going to be an addition to the sculpture. And this part of the build is going to be quite silly in its appearance as well as its process. I mean, I'll admit, I even know what it's going to be, and it still kind of looks like I'm just stacking a bunch of blocks. And I am, but there is a purpose.
It's definitely starting to get a little sketchy.
And you may notice that sketchy is an adjective that I use quite often in this build.
Oh, geez. Dang it. This is going to be a really fun project. So the positioning of this first block is really important. I need it to overhang this section considerably, as well as this section.
Earlier when I said things were going to get a lot harder from here, this is a section that is a lot more challenging than meets the eye. In most projects, I'll have a 3D model that I create beforehand just to make sure everything looks right and to have dimensions to go off of. And with this one, it didn't turn out so well. Ready to see it? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I know, it's gorgeous, but it wasn't helpful. I couldn't take any measurements off of it. It was entirely unusable. So it turns out SketchUp is not very good at modeling organic structures. Either that or I'm not willing to spend 5 months learning the plugins. So I decided to try something that I never was good at to begin with. The treacherous drawing it by hand.
Yeah, I think I need this to curve more. So I'm not entirely certain that this is the exact curve I need, but we're just gonna have to run with it.
I 3D printed this glue spreader because it fine-tunes the exact amount of glue I have on each block. That way it limits the slipping, because before I was getting a ton of slippage and it was hard to clamp, but now I'm barely getting any at all.
This is the wrong one. That's why it didn't fit into the lines. The correct one. So for the second branch that goes up, I think I'm gonna have to use my other 12-footer that I have. I was trying to save this one for a different project because it has really cool knot inclusions and such, but I think it's her time. Oh boy. Whew. Man, these 12-footers don't get any lighter, do they?
At this point, I have the first branch of the lamp just clamped in place. All the blocks are glued together, but it is not at full height. I need to work on this second branch that's going to house a bunch of pots.
Every time I get the last step done, I feel relief, which just leads me to the anxiety of the next step.
Since this is definitely more of a figure it out as I go type of project, and knowing that the steps get progressively harder, it can be a little scary as each step has to be worked out and each problem has to be diagnosed. The obstacle that I'm facing here is that the space is really tight, but I need to fit 3 plants.
So as I'm trying to fit these all in here, I'm realizing that I think I need this board to be longer right here so that it can actually fit the confines of this pot in that section. Also, I used a small template for this middle one and I should have used the medium, which makes everything even tighter.
When I realized I needed to draw this thing in order to design it, I kind of had to take a deep breath. So now that you know plants and water are combined, how on earth am I going to draw this thing out on paper and still be confident that it's all going to work, especially with how much money and time that's going to be going into it? But hey, that's how they used to accomplish it every single time, and some people still do. So I just had to do it. Yep, it may not be scary to you, but I did in fact draw it. And let's see Bridget's reaction.
Here's my shitty drawing.
It's not shitty.
So what do you think? Was she lying to my face to save my man feelings? Go ahead, be honest. I'll turn away when I cry so you don't have to feel bad.
So while those are sitting and curing, I've been modeling a solution for these super glue bottles. If you use these, you probably know that the caps always get stuck on there, and then they break the tip off. So I modeled and printed these tiny little caps out of TPU, and I printed several at once so that when they get gunked up, I can just replace them. Simple solution.
These are the reasons that I'm happy to work with Bamboo Lab again. Not only can I solve annoying problems around the shop, but this project is more reliant on using their precise machines than you probably think. Because each pot section has a custom organic shape, and I was able to print the placement template, router template, drip tray, and custom pot from the same machine. This means everything is calibrated to each other, and most importantly, it's an absolute perfect fit every single time. Not to mention, I'm going to be printing other vital components such as a custom water spout that make this whole project possible. The machine I used is the H2D, and alongside the AMS2, this thing is a beast. The first noticeable thing is the larger bed, which I needed to print the large pots. But even cooler is the dual nozzles, which makes changing between filaments much quicker. So now I can have the AMS2 drying filaments connected to one nozzle and have another filament on the other nozzle ready to go. Then switching between the two happens in mere seconds, so you're not waiting for filament loading. On top of that, the H2D is capable of printing high temperature advanced filaments. So the one I'm using for the final pots is black carbon fiber reinforced ASA. So again, thank you Bamboo Lab for making this all possible. And if you happen to feel inspired to check out some of their machines, using the link I have in the description supports the channel by letting them know who inspired you. By the way, that's a 3D printed bearing sleeve I wanted to try so that I wasn't grinding the collet anymore.
I cannot believe that survived, but she's fine.
If you haven't caught on, the important thing to know about this section is that each pot needs to be routed out before the next piece is glued on, otherwise it'll block the router.
So I know this totally looks like a lug right now, but I guarantee with 100% certainty that this will either be the most beautiful thing I've ever made or the funniest. Ooh, that was a close one. I almost smashed my hand right into that corner. Did we hit it? Oh my gosh.
This hole that I'm creating is making it possible to feed electrical and water to the top of this lamp. And from here forward, not only does this hole need to continue through each block, but it needs to align when I actually glue them up. And the most challenging part out of all of this is the hole needs to continue staying somewhat central on the blocks. That way when I'm carving later, I don't just carve right through that hole and expose it. Not to mention, in this specific set of blocks, the hole has to jump forward.
Ouch. I'm gonna be so beat up at the end of this project.
The reason for this jumping forward is so that I can avoid the pot that I'm about to route in. If I kept the path that it was going on, it would go right through the center.
This piece is ready. I got that spot cut out for the pot. It did expose a little bit of that hole, but I think that'll be fine. And the important part is that I need to drill through this into the next piece so that I know where the hole is for the next piece.
And you wouldn't think that it'd be too hard, but actually remembering to drill into the next piece to mark it before the last one gets glued up is way more challenging than I was expecting.
I should probably get something like a string through this before it's too hard. Feels like I'm doing electrical in a piece of furniture. So I aimed okay because this will get covered up with the next piece, but this has to get mortised for this pot and it's just going to be in the way. So I need to drill from this side more over here and try to hit that same hole. Let's see where we came out.
Nailed it! And this is where the large hole can end because this is where the water spout will connect. I'm sure this is hard for you to imagine, especially since it was kind of hard for me to imagine, so I'll use my beautiful 3D model to show you. The first branch we worked on is this left one. It has a secret purpose, but has nothing in it, and it will help hold up the other branch. The second one, though, holds a lot of things, like plants, wires, and even that water tube that will spout right here. So now you know where we're located in the stack, and it has taken a tremendous amount of work, which means a huge mess. Well, it's time to put money where my mouth is, and this section has absolutely everything. Wires, the water tube, the freaking spout, plants, even lights on the bottom of it. It'll connect the lower branches together as well as continue the branch up to the lampshade, and to make things just a wee bit more challenging, it'll have a river running through it as well. So, no stress at all. But if I screw up even one thing, it'll only compound its errors onto every single step moving forward. Nothing to worry about. So absolutely everything moving forward needs to be perfect, and I can do that, right?
So I just realized an issue with this. I need to be able to get this thing in after all this is glued up. I can't just glue this in here and expect to not have problems later. I might have to replace this one day, and you never know. So I'm gonna have to figure out how I can get this in from the bottom side, or if I have to redesign this.
Okay, no problem. I think I slid by on this one. I think I can just cut out a little extra, that way it can slide up and move forward into position. Remember at the beginning of the video where I mentioned that it's strictly important to cut things out as I go before they're glued up to save time later? Well, I'm currently learning my lesson because I didn't do that this time.
Already just bent it. Another one. I guess it's not long enough.
Here's a good perspective to learn. This one single process of cutting out the section for this one pot took the better part of an entire day. And if I had jigsawed them out beforehand, it would have taken maybe an hour after routing them out. So ouch, this project has some painful learning lessons. One single mistake can cost maybe 5 hours or even days.
That was the last one. That took like 2 weeks to glue up. That's crazy.
So I'm about to use a tool that I've definitely never used for fine woodworking. And in a way, it almost seems like it's not even allowed in a wood shop. It can be more dangerous than any other tool if used incorrectly, and we usually use this thing to cut trees down, not really create fine art or furniture from them.
Oh yeah, baby.
The "oh yeah, baby" might cue you into the fact that this is the first time I've used a chainsaw to carve. I knew that this would just be a monstrous amount of carving ahead of time, so I got it, and I sure am glad I did.
First of all, this is working beautifully. And then second of all, I realized that I should probably work on the top to lighten that up first, then work on the base.
Remember, at this point, the blocks probably weigh 150 pounds together, and if I start carving at things and making things thin on the bottom, when I carve the top, I could actually break it. And this is because with the way the blocks are oriented, there's really not any grain going up the branch to keep it stiff. The grain is actually going across the branch, which is called short grain. This was the easiest way to stack the blocks, but now I have to be really careful because if I put too much pressure in one spot, I could break it. If you find a lot of the informative parts of this video interesting, then you should definitely know that we actually film separate content for each project and post it to YouTube memberships and Patreon, with narratives that are jam-packed with information, as well as some of the behind-the-scenes silly things that happen in our shop. So if you find any part of this process confusing or you want some clarity, I can almost guarantee you'll find the information you need in our exclusive videos, and if you don't find it, you can message me directly on Patreon. So give it a try for a month, there's no long-term commitment, and you'll see all of the exclusive videos for the next project before it even comes out on YouTube. And by the way, every 3D modeling file, including the pots, calipers, glue spreader, everything, they'll all be available at no extra cost on those platforms. Now is the time for my bravery test, because I have to start carving the river into this very, very precious piece. But something that I realized is that I actually have some history that should help me with this process, believe it or not. When I was a young feller in early high school, my friends and I used to go to these red rocks to climb, sometimes even during school days. And I'm telling you, we religiously went to this place. We were obsessed. We climbed every weekend, and there was this one climb that still gives me chills to this day. We got stuck at the top and we did not think we were going to get back down.
Well, she's still a little rough, but I think we're gonna start the next phase. So I'm not completely done carving the other one, but I did want to bring it over here and install it just to see how it interacts with the rest of the sculpture.
We, as young kids, were stuck at the top of a 100-foot cliff face with no other option but to climb down through a crack that was half the size of our bodies. But at the bottom, there wasn't soft bushes. It was a slanted rock leading to a dark cave. So with half of our bodies hanging out of the crack, we slowly climbed down.
You know what I realized this morning that's kind of ironic? This walnut started out as a tree, which was cut into boards that I glued back together, and now I'm carving it basically back into a tree.
The river that we carved earlier will lead to the other branch, and this is where it'll have a little waterfall. But the rest of the branch is going to have one long waterfall scene.
All right, let's do this again.
That day that we all climbed down that cliff face, all 6 of us miraculously made it down safely. But that image and that fear is forever seared into my memory. So what in the heck does that have to do with this, you ask? And that answer is way more complex than you may think. So I think it's best if I start with the simple reasons first. When I first started carving this project, it literally started giving me flashbacks of climbing those red rocks. And among a lot of those rocks were these really, really cool waterfall features that were carved out by water over thousands of years. Well, in this very moment as I'm carving this, I'm realizing that that imagery that's seared in my brain is actually helping me understand how to carve a waterfall. Because after all, this is a pretty steep branch, and just letting the water fall down, it would catch way too much speed and get everywhere. So I get to experience this weird sense of joy as I play God in this miniature world that I'm making. And it's kind of a trippy concept, but also very enjoyable. And a lot of thinking to do. I constantly have to ask myself, what move should I make next?
But I've had to ask myself too many of those questions today, so I think I'm done.
As I refine the features on this waterfall, I can't help but to think, how has my life led from being a dangerous teenager climbing red rocks to facing addiction, then recovery and sobriety, and now being an artist? The complicated part of this story is even the bad parts of my life have played a positive role in who I am right now. I'm certainly not saying go out and do bad or dangerous things, but what I am saying is that every single part of your story is important and plays a role.
The nice part is this thing is a lot lighter now. That's for sure. Okay. Oh, like that? Oh. Spider-Man, Spider-Man. Woo! Boy, I almost lost her. You ain't going nowhere though. I'm gonna have to fix how these two interact, but for now, I wanna work on adding some pieces so that these look like they're growing out of the base. Oh, lovely. I guess I'll just sit here for an hour.
I actually sat for about 5 minutes while the glue tacked up, then very quickly ran and got the mini carver and carved a few spots for the clamps. And for the next one, Bridget, yeah, I know, she told me I should probably clamp a block at the top so that I can just clamp to that. And I could have easily told you that it was my idea and I was thinking ahead, but honestly, I should probably give credit where credit is due.
Bummer.
And today is my dumb day. We all have them from time to time.
All right, this time I have some super glue in the middle. That way I don't have to clamp it. I'm just gonna stick it and leave it there overnight.
This time around, I'm going to double stick tape a backer board on, that way it helps with tear out, as well as keeps the thing a little bit stronger during the process. And while I'm at it, I might as well fix a few other mistakes that I made. I ended up carving through into these pot sections a couple times. Kind of sucks. I didn't realize I was even carving through them until I was all the way through. But on the lucky side, the pots actually taper to a smaller size on the bottom, so I can actually add fill blocks and then just smooth it out on the outside and problem solved. Another mistake I made is also drilling in the wrong spot. I actually drilled a big ol' hole through my pond. On this one, the drill bit just ate its way through the path of least resistance, so I can just fill it with a peg and sand it back.
So after all, this is a lamp, so it does need a lampshade. But I'm not just gonna throw any ordinary lampshade up there. That would look silly. It's gonna be crazy.
And dude, by crazy, I mean this thing is gonna be freaking crazy. Sure, a carved walnut lampshade might not be that insane, but that is not the full story. Most of it gets interesting after gluing these things together, so this thing's kind of a clunker right now. It's in two pieces and way bigger than it needs to be. By keeping it in two halves, I can access each half separately and carve it a lot easier. And by the way, this Jessam ruler is freaking sick. I'll have links to products that I use in the description below. The other thing that keeping them in separate two halves does is I can actually mark out the profile I want and stick to that as I'm carving. What I'm measuring it with right now is just some 3D printed calipers I designed. That way I can make sure I'm not getting too thin. Once I get close to about a 1/2 inch, I don't want to get any further. I want to keep enough meat on the bone so I don't spontaneously blow through and ruin days of work. It looks like I'm gluing them together, but I'm actually double stick taping them together so I can just continue the processes.
I marked a flat spot on here so that I would leave it so that I could clamp it, and then I still carved it away.
Briefly going back to the way this project was designed, I ended up using AI for one part of this. And through the process of misunderstanding me, it actually helped.
Well, so far it looks like a Gandalf hat, but we're gonna change that pretty soon.
When I asked ChatGPT to give me a glowing lampshade based on the design that I provided, it did not listen very well.
So with the way the branch needs to flow into this lampshade, I think I need to cut off a few of these because they don't flare enough. It sucks to undo my work, but I think I have no other choice.
What ChatGPT finally did give me is this, which is the very basic lampshade that I was trying to avoid. Thanks, Mr. GPT, for being a really good helper. So I ended up spending a long time telling it exactly what I needed, convincing it, bargaining with it, going to therapy with it. I mean, at one point, I think it was actually sobbing and I had to comfort it. It was kind of weird. But in the end, it did give me this, which doesn't even look like me. I have way bigger muscles and my jawline is way sexier. Then after it was done attacking my character, it gave me this, which is somewhat what I asked for, kind of. But more importantly, it gave me an idea. I don't actually need any of the walnut to be transparent because I'm gonna cut out a few spots and then put some really unique paper there. That way I don't have to walk the fine line of getting this thing paper thin to be see-through. Instead, I can let the textured paper do the trick. The challenging part is getting these things cut out because I can't just throw it on the bandsaw. Any entry point would have to be re-glued shut and it would most definitely be obvious in the end. So a careful drilling and jigsaw did the trick. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank my patrons. Your continued support provides me the opportunity to make better content. And when I'm making better content, I'm inspiring more people. So your membership is more than just this. It's a lot more than this. It's about giving people the information they need to know to learn a lot faster. Why should John from Texas spend years of his life learning how to finish walnut like a pro when he could just go on my Patreon and learn it in a couple days? So thank you for being a part of that and making it worth all of our extra effort to make that content.
All right, they're coming together, literally, and it's time to cut this plywood off.
This replacement neck section flares a lot more than the old one did, and making that decision to cut the old one off, even though it kind of hurt to lose that time, I really think it was the right decision. Because now it'll lead from this neck section to the lampshade a lot more organically and not forced. These are hard decisions to make as an artist, especially when I have no clue how the final end product is even gonna look. I wanna give it the best chance I possibly can. And right now I'm getting everything as close to finished as I possibly can before I connect the two. As you can probably imagine, this thing's gonna be pretty fragile after it's all together. So I'm even refining the section directly under the shade so I don't have to do it after the fact.
Here's a cool trick to get the rope back through the hole. There we go. I'm making sure I wait plenty long enough.
As I'm refining this sculpture, you may notice that there's a lot of different elements, a lot of natural elements. And that's all on purpose because I'm starting a new mini-series called the Elements series. This first run, I'm just doing 2 videos with 2 elements incorporated into each. And I bet you can probably never guess what elements this video incorporates. Well, you are actually absolutely correct. It is earth and water. And guess what that leaves for the next video?
This is going to be nerve-wracking.
If you think this is nerve-wracking, then just wait till you make the next video, buddy, because that's wind and fire. There likely will be more straight lines and a different build process, and that's all you really need to know. So if you want, you can subscribe so you definitely don't miss it. As I mentioned earlier, there will be lighting all over this thing. So I got these cute little mini can lights so that I could shove them in the holes and then they'd be recessed and not obstructing the view of anything. So I'm just finishing up a few sections where the wires will run, as well as where some of the lights will sit. Whenever you're dealing with special lighting, especially with a sculpture like this, it's important to test it underneath the lights. Like this section that's not getting much light, so I carved away above it and now it gets much more light. Right now the sculpture looks a bit archaic in a way, but that's because it's not a finished piece. I pre-planned the plants being a part of the art. They're going to fill in the negative space. So if you think you know what this is going to look like, then just wait. It's going to transform tremendously during these finishing stages. And now that I have the water hose section leading all the way to the bottom, that means everything is technically done. I can finish sand and...
I am so sick of sand.
If you're perhaps new here, then yes, this is me staining walnut. I know, at first glance it almost seems sacrilegious, but I'll tell you why.
What?
Walnut is definitely one of the most beautiful domestic woods we have in the US, and it tends to be a lot of people's favorite wood, including Toby Bubs here, but he can't have it because it's toxic for canines. And it has one huge drawback. It actually fades over time.
All right, it's next day and I kept a fan on it overnight. Let's get this thing finished.
Well, the stain that we put on previously has pigments in it that actually block UV light, so it helps slow down the fading process considerably. The really challenging part is knowing what stain to use and making it look natural so it doesn't just look like stained wood. On top of that, epoxy does not like to adhere to a stained surface, at least if you're using an oil-based stain. So I've shared my entire process several times on Patreon so that you can make your walnut look this good too.
This looks so good. I'm getting super excited.
When I was in the starting stages of this project, I sat at my desk with several plants and a piece of paper in front of me, meticulously measuring every single plant because I didn't want to screw it up.
I'm nervous because this is a new medium that I'm working with and I do not want to kill all these plants.
And at this stage in the game, as I'm sealing everything in epoxy to protect it from water, I still don't know if everything's going to work. I wasn't able to test the waterfall, if the plants fit, even how the lamp's going to look with its final shade material. So to be honest, I'm still pretty nervous because hundreds of hours have gone into this project as well as video, and I can't let you down.
Well, I'd say everything cured.
It would be quite ugly to leave everything glossy. It just doesn't fit that natural feel. So I'm scuff sanding everything and spraying on 2 coats of halcyon satin.
All right, so while that finishes drying, we can get these plants ready. We have our custom pots. We just need to transfer them over. And I have one last secret plant that you won't see till the end.
There we go.
Oh, wow.
He's really root bound.
Now that Bridget gave me a lesson in pot planting 101, I can get all these plants transferred over into their final custom pots. We saved any root-bound plants for bigger pots outside of this project. For the lampshade, I got this really interesting material, which is mulberry paper with teak leaves pressed into it. So after darkening the color from orange to more of a brown and sealing it, I can actually get it attached to the lamp, as well as mount the fixture. I can finally pull the wires and that hose through with the rope, then attach a variation of this spout that's printed with ASA carbon fiber. A project like this isn't simple. It requires numerous different skills, an understanding of how electricity and water work, not to mention the woodwork.
And in case you're wondering, she's 114 pounds.
And this one was really fun to make, and more importantly, it was fun to share with you. And after all, my job actually isn't a woodworker. It's about providing you an experience through the video. And in the intro, I mentioned that I can't explain it. You'll just have to experience it. Well, I hope that experience happened for you, because that is truly what matters most.
Oh, it's too much water.
3 pumps later, and the 4th one is just right, and some stones to slow the water a bit, she's finally ready. It is absolutely crazy that that lamp came from this. Trips me out.